Hello, and welcome back. Tonight we're stepping into the mist. We're going to Valheim, the 10th realm, the land of the exiled, the world that a handful of Swedish developers built in a spare bedroom and then watched in quiet disbelief as 12 million people came pouring in. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's go through 100 facts about one of the most remarkable games of the last decade. Fact 1. Valheim was originally a solo side project. Richard Svensson, one of the two founders of Iron Gate Studio, began building the game in 2017 while still employed at another studio called Pieces Interactive. He worked on it in his spare time, quietly, with no announcement and no team. The working title he gave it was Fade, a Swedish word meaning feud. He left Pieces Interactive in 2018 to work on it full-time, and shortly after convinced his colleague Henrik Turnquist to join him. Fact 2. Before Valheim, Svensson had been working on a completely different game, a simulation title called Tolroko, that was never released. According to Turnquist, Svensson grew to feel that the simulation systems in Tolroko were being implemented for their own sake rather than in service of the player. That lesson that systems should serve the experience and not exist purely for the sake of existing became a guiding principle behind how Valheim was designed. Fact 3. Iron Gate Studio was formally founded as a company in 2019. By the time the game launched into early access in February 2021, the entire development had been carried out by just 5 people. Richard Svensson and Henrik Turnquist had spent about a year and a half working with 3 additional developers to bring the world of Valheim to its release date. Most of that development time, roughly 2 years in total, was done by 3 people working in close collaboration, with Svensson having laid the groundwork alone for a year before that. Fact 4. Iron Gate Studio is based in Skövde, a city in the Västra Götaland county of Sweden. Several members of the founding team studied game development at the University of Skövde, which has since celebrated the studio's success as one of the most prominent examples of what its graduates have accomplished. The university noted somewhat proudly and somewhat understatedly that the game had passed million after million of downloads on Steam. Fact 5. The primary inspiration behind Valheim, according to Turnquist, was classic adventure games, specifically the Elder Scrolls series and The Legend of Zelda. The team wanted to create an adventure experience that could be shared with friends, rooted in exploration and discovery, and set against a world that felt coherent and alive. The Viking and Norse mythological setting emerged from a combination of cultural familiarity given the Swedish roots of the studio and the enduring popularity of Viking aesthetics in games and broader media. Fact 6. Valheim launched into Steam Early Access on February 2, 2021, at a price of $19.99. Within 1 week of release, it had sold 1 million copies. Within 6 weeks, it had sold 6 million. Within the first month, it crossed 5 million sales and became one of the most played games on Steam. For a studio of 5 people working with a minimal budget, the scale of that response was, by their own account, something they had not come anywhere close to anticipating. Fact 7. Coffee Stain CEO Albert Safstrom described the sales curve of Valheim to GamesIndustry.biz using a memorable analogy. He compared a normal game launch to knocking over a glass of water. Most of it comes out immediately, and then the flow slows. Valheim, he said, was more like knocking over a bathtub. For at least the first week, every single day outsold the day before. The bathtub analogy stuck, and the team at Coffee Stain later admitted they had scrambled to deal with the scale of what was happening. Fact 8. Valheim has sold over 12 million copies worldwide as of the most recent figures disclosed by Embracer Group, the parent company of Coffee Stain, the game's publisher, in September 2023. By April 2022, the game had already reached 10 million, and following the Xbox launch in March 2023, the number climbed further. It remains one of the best-selling indie games in Steam's history, and it is still technically in early access while this script is being written. Fact 9. The game reached an all-time concurrent player peak of 502,000 on Steam. To put that in context, that is more simultaneous players than most full-budget AAA releases ever achieve, and Valheim was developed by 5 people with no major marketing budget, relying almost entirely on word-of-mouth, streaming, and community sharing to drive its growth. Fact 10. Valheim was nominated for Best Debut Indie Game and Best Multiplayer Game at the Game Awards 2021. It was named the Game of the Year for 2021 by PC Gamer magazine. In 2022, it won both Best Debut and the Audience Award at the Game Developers Choice Awards, the latter being voted on entirely by the gaming community rather than a panel. which says something significant about how warmly the player base felt about it. Fact 11. Coffee Stain, the publisher behind Valheim, is also the studio responsible for Deep Rock Galactic and the production company behind Satisfactory. The success of Valheim was so transformative for Coffee Stain that its parent company Embracer Group reported the publisher was generating 12 times its previous net sales figures in the year following Valheim's launch. A single indie Viking survival game, made by 5 people, had multiplied an entire publisher's revenue more than tenfold. Fact 12. When Valheim's success became clear, Embracer Group, which owns Coffee Stain, began to openly describe the game as a potential franchise to be developed over the following decade. The idea of Valheim as a brand rather than just a single game was floated publicly, with talk of future entries, spin-offs, or expansions as possibilities for the years ahead. Whether that becomes reality depends largely on how the full release of the original game is received. Fact 13. The game was built using the Unity engine, which Svensson chose for its broad cross-platform compatibility and its integration of NVIDIA's PhysX system for physics simulations. Unity allowed the small team to build on top of existing infrastructure for networking and rendering, rather than writing those systems from scratch, which was essential given how few people were working on the project. Iron Gate has spoken about the importance of not reinventing the wheel when the wheel already works. Fact 14. The world of Valheim is procedurally generated from a seed, a string of text that the game uses to produce a unique map. Each world is approximately 314 square kilometers in size, which is an enormous amount of terrain to explore. No 2 worlds will be laid out in exactly the same way, though the biomes, the boss arenas, and the general distribution of danger will follow consistent rules. The procedural generation is built on custom algorithms, implemented on top of Unity's standard tools. Fact 15. The name Valheim is not drawn directly from traditional Norse mythology. In the canonical 9 realms of Norse cosmology, Asgard, Midgard, Jotunheim, Vanaheim, Svartalfheim, Alfheim, Niflheim, Muspelheim, and Helheim, there is no Valheim. Iron Gate invented it as a fictional 10th realm, a place unanchored from the great world tree Yggdrasil, used by Odin as a prison and an exile for his enemies. The word itself is Old Norse. Val from Velja, meaning choice, and Heim meaning homemaking Valheim, literally the home of the chosen. Fact 16. The premise of the game is delivered in its opening text. Slain in battle, the player character has been carried to Valheim, the 10th world, not to rest, but to prove their worth to Odin by defeating the great enemies that have been exiled here alongside them. Only by defeating these ancient and dangerous Forsaken creatures will the player earn their place in Valhalla. The game is, at its core, a divine trial set at the end of a warrior's life. Death in the game is not an endpoint, it is simply another step in a process that has been underway since the moment you first arrived. Fact 17. Throughout the world of Valheim, players can look up into the sky anywhere, from any open space, and see the enormous glowing branches of Yggdrasil, the world tree of Norse mythology. The branches are woven into the sky itself, vast and luminous, stretching across the horizon. In the game's lore, Valheim is described as having been cut off from Yggdrasil by Odin, and yet the branches are still there, still visible, as if the tree did not quite let go. The community has speculated that this is intentional. The realm was never truly severed, just forgotten. Fact 18. The runestones scattered throughout the world of Valheim are among the game's most important lore delivery mechanisms. They are large rocks with red runes carved into them, written in Old Norse-style text, and they contain both useful tips about nearby creatures and fragments of the world's story. Among the most significant are the runestones written by 3 named characters, Ulf, Astrid, and Harald. These are believed to be fellow fallen Viking souls, like the player who were recruited by Odin's Valkyries from the battlefields of Midgard and sent to Valheim to prove themselves. Fact 19. Astrid's runestones are particularly notable. In one of her entries, she reveals that she has been in Valheim for at least 7 years. She describes having once been a shield maiden and now fights the Forsaken and the great beasts in Odin's name. The casualness with which she mentions 7 years as if it is simply the length of a job, a posting she was given and has been carrying out without complaint, is one of the quieter, unsettling details in a game that is full of them. Fact 20. The history of Valheim as a place is told through scattered references, rather than a single narrative. One runestone describes a time when Valheim was home to a proud and noble population people who built great towers and mined for precious metals. The same stone tells us that this civilization ultimately challenged the gods and lost everything. This makes Valheim not just a prison for Odin's enemies, but a graveyard of an entire culture that rose and collapsed before the player ever arrived. Fact 21. Hugin, the large black raven who appears at the start of the game to guide the player, is named after one of Odin's two ravens from Norse mythology. In the original myths, Hugin and his twin Munin, whose names translate as thought and memory respectively, flew across all the worlds each day to bring Odin information about what was happening in the cosmos. They were his eyes and ears. In Valheim, Hugin fills a similar role, but in reverse. Rather than reporting to Odin, he is sent by Odin to relay guidance to the player. He knows things. He is watching. Fact 22. A one-eyed cloaked figure carrying a staff can occasionally be spotted in the world of Valheim, watching from a distance before disappearing. This figure is Odin himself. Sightings become more frequent after the player defeats the first boss, suggesting that Odin's interest in the player increases as they demonstrate their capability. His one eye is a direct reference to the myth of Odin sacrificing his eye at the Well of Mimir to gain wisdom, one of the most enduring images in Norse mythology. Fact 23. During storms in Valheim, players who look up into the sky at the right moment may see a glimpse of Thor crossing the clouds. The sighting is brief and easy to miss, and Iron Gate confirmed its existence early on through developer communication. The game's developer had been asked directly in a 2021 interview whether Odin would appear and what Loki's role in the world might be, noting, "The Allfather is definitely in our plans. Thor you can already meet. I won't say how exactly, but be careful when you hear thunder." Fact 24. Eikthyr, the first boss of the game, takes its name from Eikthyr, a stag in Norse mythology said to stand on the roof of Valhalla, chewing on the branches of Yggdrasil. From its antlers, the myth says, rivers drip down into the world below. In Valheim, Eikthyr appears as a massive stag with chains wrapped around its antlers, a creature that was once exalted and has now been bound and cast into exile. Its trophy reads that the wilderness will never submit to Odin's rules, suggesting it was sent here for leading a kind of revolt of the natural world against the gods. Fact 25. The Elder, the second boss, is described in the game's lore as having once been a shoot of Yggdrasil itself, a branch of the world tree that grew sentient, set itself against the gods, and was banished for its pride. The idea of a fragment of the cosmic tree achieving consciousness and then being thrown into a prison realm for being too ambitious is a quietly extraordinary piece of world building told in only a few lines of text and never expanded upon further. Fact 26. Bone Mass, the third boss, is a massive glowing blob of rotting biological material found within the deepest parts of the swamp biome. Its appearance and name may reference Nidhöggr, the great serpent or dragon of Norse mythology that gnaws eternally at the roots of Yggdrasil, sustaining itself by feasting on corpses. Like Nidhöggr, Bone Mass is associated with decay, with the dead, and with something that has been eating away at the foundations of the world for a very long time. Fact 27. Modda, the fourth boss, is a dragon of enormous size found in the mountain biome. Her name means mother in several Scandinavian languages, and she is described as protective of her eggs, 3 of which must be collected and placed at her summoning altar to call her forth. The act of taking a creature's eggs and using them as the key to summon and kill her has a mythological weight to it that the game never explicitly comments on. She is simply there, ancient and cold, and you take what is hers to bring her to you. Fact 28. Yagluth, the fifth boss, resides in the Plains biome, the game's most dangerous pre-Mistlands environment. He appears as an enormous skeletal figure, partially buried in the earth, with only his upper body and one clawed arm visible above the ground. In life, based on the lore, he appears to have been a powerful warrior, possibly even a Viking like the player. When defeated, he speaks of Odin being unable to save anyone in this place. There is something in his voice that sounds less like defiance and more like exhaustion. Fact 29. The Queen, the sixth boss introduced in the Mistlands update of December 2022, is a massive insectoid creature, the ruler of the Seeker creatures that populate the Mistlands biome. She represents the most significant single addition to the game's boss roster after the original 5, and her arrival introduced a new tier of challenge that players had been anticipating for nearly 2 years. The Mistlands update was Iron Gate's largest content drop since launch, and added an entirely new biome, new enemies, new NPCs, a full magic system, and dozens of new crafting options. Fact 30. Fada, the seventh boss, was added with the Ashlands update in May 2024. The Ashlands is a volcanic, fire-swept biome located at the southernmost point of the world map, a place of extreme danger, extreme heat, and extremely hostile enemies. With Fader's addition, only one more major boss and one more biome, the Deep North, remained to be completed before the game could achieve its full release. As of this writing, that final update and the game's one launch are expected sometime in 2026. And now it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today we're looking at the name of one of Valheim's most beloved and mysterious NPCs, Haldur the Merchant. Haldur is a dvergr, a dwarf, found somewhere in the Black Forest biome of every world. He has 10 possible spawn locations, always at least 1,500 meters from the center of the map. His camp is protected by a transparent dome powered by 4 small runestones carved with Odin's illusory rune, a Viking glyph devised to provide camouflage and deception. This dome is visible and passable to potential customers, but hostile creatures like grey dwarfs cannot enter it. Haldur tamed a lox named Halstein, who can be seen happily eating from a bowl nearby. In some playthroughs, players have spent 40, 60, even 90 hours never finding him. And yet there he is, in every world, waiting patiently behind his invisible wall, surrounded by fog and hostility, absolutely unbothered. Fact 31. Haldur and his sister Hildir are dvergr, the dwarves of Valheim's world. The other dvergr in the game are found in the Mistlands and are not friendly toward the player unless specific conditions are met. Haldur and Hildir, however, are traders who have set up shop in the most dangerous and isolated realm in the known universe. The game never explains why 2 dwarf merchants are operating in a prison world for the enemies of the gods. The community has speculated extensively. The game simply does not say. Fact 32. Hildir, Haldur's sister, was added in a later update and is found in the Meadows biome. Her name bears a resemblance to Hilja, the name of a Valkyrie in Norse mythology, Hilja meaning battle in Old Norse. Hildir sends the player on treasure hunting quests that culminate in combat encounters, while Haldur simply sells items for coins. Whether the Valkyrie connection is intentional wordplay from Iron Gate or a coincidence has never been confirmed. Fact 33. The food system in Valheim is designed around a philosophy that makes it genuinely unusual among survival games. There is no hunger meter. The player does not starve to death. Instead, eating food actively increases the player's maximum health and stamina. Different foods provide different balances. Some foods heavily boost health with minimal stamina, some do the reverse, and some provide Aita, the resource introduced with the magic system in the Mistlands update. The act of eating is a tactical decision about how you want to approach the next challenge, not a maintenance task to prevent death from neglect. Fact 34. Dying in Valheim causes a 10% loss across all skill levels. This is one of the most significant and debated design decisions in the game. At low skill levels, the penalty is barely noticeable. But at high skill levels, when a player has spent dozens or hundreds of hours developing a skill past 50 or 60 points, a single death can represent hours of lost progress. The tombstone that marks where you fell will contain everything you were carrying. Returning to retrieve it is often itself a dangerous endeavor. Fact 35. The day and night cycle in Valheim runs on a 30-minute real-time clock. Daytime lasts roughly 20 minutes of that cycle, and nighttime the remaining 10. Nighttime is notably more dangerous. Certain enemies are more aggressive, a cold debuff reduces stamina regeneration for players caught outside, and the darkness itself limits visibility in ways that can make familiar terrain feel entirely different. New players who find themselves outside as the sun goes down are encouraged strongly by the game's design to be somewhere safe, quickly. Fact 36. Rain in Valheim extinguishes open fires. This is not a minor inconvenience. Fire is central to survival in the early game, powering the smelter, the charcoal kiln, the cooking station. A sudden rainstorm during a smelting session can bring operations to a halt. The solution, building a roof over your essential fire-dependent stations, is one of the first lessons the game teaches through experience rather than instruction. You build in the open. It rains. Your fire goes out, you build a roof, you never make that mistake again. Fact 37. Wind direction is tracked in real time in Valheim and has a tangible effect on everything from sailing to hunting. When hunting prey, approaching from downwind means your scent will not reach the animal before you do. Approaching upwind will alert them. This is not a mechanic that many players immediately think about, but it is one of those quiet authenticity details that makes the world feel more grounded than its stylized aesthetic might initially suggest. Fact 38. Valheim's sailing system implements a real-world nautical technique called tacking. When the wind is blowing directly against the direction you want to travel, rather than sitting still or rowing slowly, players can angle their boat at roughly 45 degrees to the wind and zigzag toward their destination. This is exactly how real sailing ships navigated against headwinds for thousands of years before the invention of engine-powered vessels. The game does not explain this mechanic. It simply works, and players who discover it feel genuinely accomplished. Fact 39. There is a hidden piece of sailing physics in Valheim that most players never realize. Sailing with the wind coming directly from the side of crosswind is actually faster than having a direct tailwind. When the wind strikes the sail at 90 degrees, it generates lift in the same way that an airplane wing generates lift, driving the boat forward faster than the wind itself is moving. The wind direction ring on the sailing HUD is bright gold at the sides to indicate this, but the tooltip explaining why it is faster is never given to the player. It is simply there to discover. Fact 40. Motor's Forsaken Power, the ability unlocked by defeating the fourth boss, lets the player control the wind while sailing, ensuring a tailwind for a limited period regardless of actual wind conditions. For players who have struggled with headwinds on long ocean crossings, this power is transformative. It is one of the game's more elegant design connections. You fight a dragon on a frozen mountain to gain the ability to command the air above the sea. Fact 41. Ore and processed metals cannot be carried through portals in Valheim. This is the game's most significant and intentional restriction on its fast travel system. You can portal anywhere instantly, back to base, to a distant outpost, to a friend's location, but if you are carrying iron ore, copper bars, black metal, or any other refined or raw metal resource, the portal will not activate. You must sail it back. This single design decision forces players to engage with the sailing system, with the ocean biome, and with the risk of open water crossings throughout the entire length of the game. Fact 42. Valheim supports up to 10 players on a single server simultaneously. The base game was designed with co-op in mind, but is fully functional as a solo experience as well. The design philosophy of the game accommodates both playstyles without obvious compromise. The world scales in difficulty rather than in enemy numbers, and the satisfaction of solo resource gathering and base building is quite different from the chaos and efficiency of a full crew, without either feeling inferior. Fact 43. The building system in Valheim uses a structural integrity mechanic that was inspired by real-world physics, but functions more like magic flowing through the materials. Each building piece has a support value that is calculated based on how it connects to the ground or to other pieces. A piece too far from a support structure will turn red and eventually collapse. Wood, stone, and iron all have different maximum span distances. Players who want to build impossibly large or dramatic structures must learn to disguise supports or use higher-tier materials cleverly. The game enforces a basic relationship between ambition and engineering. Fact 44. Despite the structural integrity system preventing most mid-air constructions, the Valheim community discovered a method to create genuinely floating structures using a terrain manipulation exploit. By excavating large copper deposits in specific ways, players could trigger a physics quirk that left building pieces suspended without visible support. The technique, shared extensively on Reddit and YouTube with full tutorials, required enormous effort and no mods or cheats. The community's willingness to spend dozens of hours on an exploit that produced floating castles purely for aesthetic reasons captures something important about Valheim's player base. Fact 45. The wishbone, an item dropped by the third boss, Bone Mass allows players to detect buried treasures, muddy scrap piles, and silver ore deposits hidden beneath the surface of the mountain biome. Without the wishbone, silver is effectively invisible. With it, the item pulses and beeps in a way that guides the player toward deposits that might be buried several meters underground. It is a mechanical reward that is explicitly tied to boss progression. You cannot efficiently mine the mountain's most valuable resource until you have conquered the swamps. Fact 46. Wolves in the mountain biome can be tamed through patient feeding and a long, dangerous taming process. Once tamed, they can be bred, they will follow the player, and they will fight alongside them. A pack of bred wolves is among the most effective companions the player can bring into late-game combat. The wolves also bark and howl in response to nearby enemies, functioning as an early warning system in the same way that dogs have been used by human settlements for thousands of years. Fact 47. Boars in the meadows biome can similarly be tamed, bred, and kept as livestock. Feeding them over time produces a steady supply of meat and leather scraps, making them one of the earliest sustainable food sources available to the player. The act of building a pen, luring boars inside, and waiting patiently for them to tame, all while making sure nothing aggressive gets into the enclosure, is one of Valheim's more quietly satisfying long-term projects, particularly in the early hours of a new playthrough. Fact 48. Chickens were added to Valheim with the Mistlands update. Players can purchase chicken eggs from Haldor, but only after defeating Yagluth, the 5th boss. The eggs must be placed near a fire source for 30 minutes to hatch. Tamed hens can produce eggs on their own when fed the correct seeds. The introduction of an animal that requires boss progression to even unlock its egg buying stage reflects the layered, graduated gating that runs through the entirety of Valheim's design. Each tier of the game unlocks tools and resources that the previous tier had no access to. Fact 49. When a tree falls in Valheim, it can knock down other trees in its path. Chopping down a large birch next to a cluster of smaller pines can trigger a cascade of toppling trunks, each one dealing damage to anything in its way, including the player, other animals, and occasionally enemies. This tree physics system was one of the details that early reviewers specifically called out as something that made Valheim feel more physically real than its deliberately lo-fi visual style might suggest. Fact 50. Large enemies in Valheim can also knock down trees. Trolls, stone golems, and even bosses will smash through environmental obstacles during combat, turning the terrain around a fight into a dynamic and destructive arena. Players who have learned this can use it strategically, baiting a troll into a dense forest and watching it clear the trees while dodging its swings, then harvesting the wood afterward. The game rewards lateral thinking about its own systems. And now it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today we're looking at the Valheim soundtrack. The game's original score was composed by Patrik Jarlestam, a Swedish-Australian composer who completed the entire soundtrack in just 4 months before the game's release, a timeline he later described as genuinely impressive given what was ultimately produced. The soundtrack was performed by a small ensemble. Jarlestam himself on guitars, bass, and percussion, alongside Philippa Murphy Haste on clarinet and viola, Janine Lee on cello, and Michael H. Dixon on French horn. In a Reddit AMA held during the game's early months, Jarlestam revealed that his musical inspirations ranged widely from Swedish folk music acts like Kongero and Gruppa to progressive metal bands like Meshuggah and Dream Theater. That range folk authenticity alongside technical complexity explains a great deal about why the Valheim soundtrack works as well as it does. He also noted that a deliberate effort was made to compose music that could loop many times without feeling repetitive, which is the primary reason so many players have described it as ideal background music for long sessions. The official soundtrack was released on Steam and Spotify on October 29, 2021. Fact 51. The Black Forest biome is home not only to grey dwarfs and trolls, but also to burial chambers, ancient stone dungeons filled with skeletons and ghosts. The presence of crows circling above a particular area of the forest is a natural navigational indicator that a burial chamber is nearby. This is not something the game tells the player. It is simply how the ecosystem was designed. Watch the sky and the forest will tell you where to look. Fact 52. The swamp biome is one of Valheim's most hostile environments. Dark, cold, rainy, and populated by draugr, blobs, surtlings, and the ever-lurking leech beneath every stretch of shallow water. Draugr in Norse mythology were undead warriors, known for guarding treasure in their burial mounds. A runestone in Valheim references them directly, noting that those who dwell below the ground do not know they are dead, and that those who delve deep to find their treasures should take heed. The warning is accurate. Fact 53. Surtlings, the small fire elementals found near geysers and in the ashlands, are named after Surtur, a fire giant of Norse mythology who is prophesied to emerge from the realm of Muspelheim during Ragnarok, wielding a great flaming sword that will set the world ablaze. In Norse cosmology, Surtur is one of the most cosmically destructive beings in existence. In Valheim, his diminutive descendants spawn in small groups near lava vents and can be farmed for coal and fire glands. The mythological distance between Ragnarok and a Viking running circles around a geyser gathering crafting materials is not a contradiction the game feels the need to address. Fact 54. The mountain biome is the only biome in the base game that inflicts a persistent environmental debuff on players who are not appropriately equipped. Without frost resistance provided either by a specific potion, a specific set of armor, or by eating a particular food, the cold of the mountains drains health continuously. This makes the mountains one of the game's gating mechanisms in the most literal sense. You cannot survive there long enough to gather resources or fight Modder until you have already worked through enough of the game to unlock the things that let you resist the cold. Fact 55. The Plains biome is, by many players' accounts, the most deceptively dangerous biome in the game relative to First Contact. The meadows looks peaceful and the Black Forest feels like a manageable threat. The swamp announces itself as hostile through its aesthetics. but the plains is open, golden, sun-drenched, and visually inviting, and contains foolings, death squeedos, and locks, all of which are capable of killing an underprepared player almost instantly. Death squeedos in particular are small, fast, and deal enormous damage from a creature with only 10 health points. Many players have died to a death squeedo before they even registered what killed them. Fact 56. The Mistlands, added in December 2022, introduced the game's first persistent environmental visibility effect. The biome is blanketed in thick, opaque mist that limits vision severely. The Divergurd, the game's other dwarf faction beyond Haldor and Hildir, are found here, protected by magical barriers. If the player attacks a Dvergura or steals from their camp, the entire camp becomes hostile. If the player helps them fight off Seeker attacks without being aggressive, the Dvergura remain passive and neutral. The distinction is one of the more nuanced creature behavior systems in the game. Fact 57. The magic system introduced in the Mistlands update added an entirely new resource called Ita. Ita functions alongside health and stamina as a third resource bar, depleted by the use of magical weapons and abilities. The name comes directly from Norse mythology. Ita was a primordial, poisonous substance, the venom from the great serpent Jörmungandr, and the toxic liquid that formed in the space between Niflheim and Muspelheim at the beginning of time, eventually giving rise to the first giant. Valheim takes this mythological concept and turns it into a mana bar. Fact 58. The Ashlands, added in May 2024, occupies the southernmost region of every Valheim world map. It is a biome of active volcanic terrain, rivers of lava, ash storms, and extremely aggressive enemies. Charred warriors, armored soldiers of fire populate the ruins of what appears to have been a large and sophisticated civilization. The biome is named after the mythological realm associated with Surtur and with the fires of Ragnarok, and its atmosphere is deliberately the furthest the game has traveled from the relative safety of the starting meadows. Fact 59. The Deep North, the final biome to be added before the game's full release, occupies the northernmost point of the world map. It will introduce the game's 8th and final boss. As of the time of this script, no final date has been given for the Deep North update, though Iron Gate confirmed a full one release is planned. Many in the community have speculated that the final boss will be connected to Norse mythology's most foreboding Final Days prophecies, particularly given the themes around Fenrir and Ragnarok that have been woven into the game's lore from early stages. Fact 60. Fenring's large wolf-like humanoid creatures found in the mountain biome are clearly connected in naming and appearance to Fenrir, the great wolf of Norse mythology who is prophesied to swallow Odin himself at the time of Ragnarok. Fenrir in the myths was so dangerous that the gods had him bound with an unbreakable chain forged by dwarves. In Valheim, the Fenring's drop materials used to craft the Fenris set of armor, which provides frost resistance and increasing speed bonuses, making you faster the fewer armor pieces you wear. The game lets you dress like the wolf. Fact 61. Grey dwarfs, the small, mossy, branch-armed creatures found throughout the Black Forest, appear to be corrupted natural spirits. Their shaman variants can summon Grey Dwarf brutes and heal other Grey Dwarfs in combat. When traveling in groups, Grey Dwarfs and brutes will throw rocks at the player from a distance before closing in. If you set up a base near a Grey Dwarf nest, the glowing green piles of gnarled roots that spawn them continuously, you will find yourself under semi-constant siege until you destroy it. Fact 62. Sea serpents inhabit the ocean biome and are one of the game's most dramatic encounters. They are large, aggressive, and will attack boats on sight. A serpent attacking a longship during a storm on a dark night is one of the more genuinely harrowing experiences the game can produce. Their scales and meat, once harvested, are among the most valuable resources from the ocean. The challenge is that killing one and then swimming the body to shore before the meat sinks is a logistical problem that the game leaves entirely to the player to solve. Fact 63. The edge of the Valheim world is not an invisible wall. If you sail long enough in any direction, you will reach the edge of the world and your ship will begin to take damage and eventually break apart. The world of Valheim, as it is described in the lore, is flat. This is consistent with the Norse cosmological model, where the world of Midgard was a flat disk surrounded by ocean, beyond which lay Jörmungandr, the great Midgard serpent, encircling the entire world with its own body. Valheim does not include the serpent at the edge of the map, but the falling off the end of a flat world is there exactly as described. Fact 64. The raft is the first boat players can build in Valheim, requiring only a workbench and basic wood materials. It is slow, barely seaworthy, and broadly considered not worth sailing beyond calm coastal waters. The Carve is the first genuinely ocean-capable vessel, made from bronze nails and fine wood with a modest cargo hold. The longship is the final and largest vessel, built with iron nails and capable of carrying 16 inventory slots of cargo alongside a full crew. The progression from raft to longship tracks almost precisely with the game's overall tier progression and functions as a kind of parallel crafting storyline running alongside the boss progression. Fact 65. Portals in Valheim must be built in pairs and tagged with matching names in order to function. A portal tagged home connects to any other portal also tagged home. This means players can build elaborate networks of portals throughout their world, connecting distant biomes, resource sites, and outposts to a central hub. The only limitation is that metals cannot travel through, which means the portal network, despite its convenience, can never completely replace the ocean. Fact 66. When a player sleeps in a bed in Valheim, they may receive a dream. These dreams, shown as text on a dark screen during the sleep animation, provide hints about upcoming biomes and content clues about what kinds of enemies are coming, what the next boss's domain will be like, what resources will be important. They are brief, poetic, and often slightly unsettling. The game uses the act of sleeping, a moment of rest and vulnerability, as the delivery mechanism for its most impressionistic storytelling. Fact 67. The rested status effect obtained by sleeping or sitting near a fire in a sheltered area provides a significant boost to health regeneration, stamina regeneration, and skill experience gain. The quality of the rested buff scales with how many comfort items are in your immediate area, meaning that a well-decorated longhouse with furniture, rugs, and banners provides a better buff than a bare shelter with only the minimum to trigger it. The game rewards players who invest in the aesthetics of their living space with a tangible gameplay advantage. Fact 68. Valheim has a gear customization system that the majority of players never discover. Many craftable shields have a style option available in the workbench interface. Clicking it opens a menu that allows players to choose from a small selection of color variants for the shield's design. Some armor pieces have this option as well. The system is not documented, not highlighted in any tooltip, and not mentioned anywhere in the game's interface. It is simply there, waiting for whoever happens to click the right button while looking at the right item. Fact 69. Banners in Valheim can be hung over doorway openings to create what are effectively secret passages, decorative fabric that the player can walk through entirely. This is mechanically identical to the secret painting doors from Minecraft, which Valheim players noted early in the community's life. Whether this is an intentional homage or a natural consequence of how both games handle banner physics, it has become a genuinely used building technique for players who want hidden entrances to their bases or storage areas. Fact 70. The game's building pieces respond to the environment in real time. Fire torches and fireplaces can be extinguished by rain unless they are under a roof. Wooden structures left unprotected in swamp biomes will accumulate water damage over time. Buildings can be destroyed by enemies during raid events, random world events where groups of hostile creatures attack the player's base, drawn by the presence of a player-built structure. The raids escalate in difficulty as the player progresses through boss tiers, meaning that the more the player advances, the more their home needs to be genuinely defensible. And now, it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today, we're looking at the Valheim Yule event, a seasonal update that Iron Gate added in December 2020, before the game had even launched into early access. The update added a decorative Yule tree that players could place in their bases during the holiday period, along with a Yule Clap gift box that would periodically drop items. The update was announced through the game's official Twitter account, with a brief message that directed players to a hidden text adventure puzzle typing specific words on the Valheim game page, produced a cryptic response, ultimately rewarding the players who cracked it with early access to details about the Yule content. It was a small, warm gesture from a studio that was still entirely unknown, building goodwill with a tiny community that had no idea what was coming 2 months later in February. Fact 71. The Forsaken Powers system, the abilities unlocked by defeating each boss and placing their trophy on the central stone altar near the player's spawn point, is one of the game's most elegant mechanical expressions of its narrative. You defeat an ancient enemy of Odin, take a piece of it, and use it to absorb a fraction of what made it powerful. Ecthir's power reduces stamina consumption for running and jumping. The Elder's power improves woodcutting speed. Bonemass's power temporarily reduces all incoming damage. Each power is thematically tied to the creature and the biome it came from. Fact 72. The Wishbone, the Swamp Key, and the Dragon Eggs are the 3 most notable quest items tied directly to boss progression. The Swamp Key dropped by the Elder unlocks the sunken crypts within the swamp biome, which are the only source of muddy scrap piles and therefore of iron. Without iron, the mid-game essentially cannot proceed. The game makes this gating feel natural rather than arbitrary by tying it to the defeat of a creature that logically guards the way forward. Fact 73. Dragon eggs, required to summon Moda, weigh 40 units each, and 3 are required for the summoning. The longship's cargo hold can manage this weight, but reaching the mountain biome on foot while carrying 3 enormously heavy eggs through hostile terrain is a considerable challenge. Many players find creative solutions, portaling supplies to a camp near the summit, using temporary structures as waypoints, or coordinating a full crew of 4 to 10 people with divided carrying loads. The summoning ritual is not simply a matter of finding the altar, it is an expedition. Fact 74. Iron Gate released the Hearth and Home update in September 2021, the game's first major content update. It focused primarily on the building and food systems, adding new building pieces, new furniture, new cooking recipes, and reorganizing the food tier system to give players more meaningful choices at each stage of the game. The update was smaller than many players had hoped for, and the long wait between it and the subsequent Mistlands update over a year tested the patience of the community considerably. Iron Gate was transparent throughout about the challenges of a small team managing a game with millions of active players. Fact 75. The Xbox launch of Valheim in March 2023 was handled not by Iron Gate themselves, but by 2 external studios, Pictive and Fish Labs. Iron Gate was explicit that they wanted to remain focused on the core game experience and its remaining content updates while the console port was developed in parallel. The Xbox version launched directly onto Xbox Game Pass, with cross-platform multiplayer support between Xbox and PC players built in from launch. Fact 76. A Nintendo Switch 2 port of Valheim was announced and is scheduled for release in 2026, the same year the game is expected to reach its full one release. The idea of Valheim, a game that was born as a solo side project in 2017 and became a global phenomenon in 2021, arriving on a Nintendo platform as part of its completed final release, is a kind of arc that the gaming industry does not often produce so cleanly. Fact 77. A PS5 version of Valheim was announced as part of the same one timeline. This would mark the first time the game has been available on PlayStation hardware, expanding its audience to a platform that has so far never had access to it. The announcement was made alongside the Deep North and One Details, suggesting Iron Gate views the full launch as a genuine moment of completion rather than simply another milestone in a perpetual early access cycle. Fact 78. The modding community around Valheim grew rapidly and has contributed an enormous variety of content to the game: new biomes, new items, new building pieces, adjustments to sailing, alternative inventory systems, and extended multiplayer slot increases. The community's most popular mod host, Thunderstore, developed specific tools and a dedicated mod manager for Valheim that simplified the installation and update process significantly. Iron Gate has been broadly supportive of modding, never taking action against the community's efforts to expand the experience. Fact 79. The Valheim community on Reddit produced one of the most sustained and high-quality streams of base-building content of any game in the survival genre. Players recreated real-world architectural structures, Viking longhouses, Roman-style villas, Japanese pagodas, Gothic cathedrals using the game's building system. Some of these builds received widespread coverage in games media and were described by players who had never touched Valheim as a reason to start playing. The building system was not marketed as a creative sandbox tool, and yet it was used as one immediately and continuously. Fact 80. One of the most shared pieces of community discovery was the revelation that the ground in Valheim can be terraformed using the hoe and cultivator tools. Players can raise terrain, flatten land, pave pathways, and reshape the landscape of their base area significantly. Combined with the building system, this means that the base construction metagame in Valheim is not just about what you build, but about reshaping the earth beneath and around it to fit the vision. Players have carved out hillsides, built artificial islands, and created moats around their fortresses using this system. Fact 81. Valheim contains a small but consistent amount of humor embedded in its design. The Dverga, the dwarves of the Mistlands, include a class of builders who complain audibly about working conditions, mutter about deadlines, and occasionally argue with each other. Haldor has a range of quotes including "I'm short for a dwarf" and "Rajdadaj," a sound of pure, inscrutable dwarf contentment. The game's general tone is epic and atmospheric, but Iron Gate has consistently allowed moments of lightness to exist alongside the weight of fighting ancient monsters for the approval of the Allfather. Fact 82. Troll caves in the Black Forest sometimes contain paintings on the cave walls, crude drawings made by the trolls themselves of humans, deer, and other subjects. They serve no mechanical purpose. They are simply there because trolls, enormous and destructive as they are, apparently make art. It is one of the most quietly charming details in the game, easily missed and never remarked upon. Fact 83. Stone golems in the mountain biome are one of Valheim's most dramatic encounters in terms of visual scale, but they have a specific and learnable weakness: blunt damage. Attacks with a club or a sledgehammer deal significantly more damage to them than slashing or piercing weapons. The game communicates weapon effectiveness through a color-coded system. Gray text indicates the enemy is resistant to that damage type, white indicates normal effectiveness, and yellow indicates a weakness. This system exists quietly in the damage numbers, without ever being explained directly in the game's interface. Fact 84. The death skeeto, the small flying insect of the plains biome, has become one of Valheim's most iconic enemies despite having only 10 health points. It deals 70 damage per attack, moves quickly, and can appear in groups. The community's relationship with the Death Skeeto is one of the few areas of consistent comedic shared trauma in Valheim's player base, the number of veteran players who have died to one while confidently walking through. The plains believing they had the situation under control is effectively incalculable. Fact 85. Feelings, the goblin-like creatures of the plains, operate in a social hierarchy. Shamans can summon and heal other feelings and hurl fire. Berserkers carry large clubs and deal enormous melee damage. Fueling villages are organized into camps with watchtowers and shared defensive behavior. When a fueling village is threatened, its inhabitants respond collectively. Raiding a fueling village for its black metal scrap is one of the game's most demanding and rewarding mid to late game activities, requiring preparation, planning, and a willingness to retreat and regroup. Fact 86. Grey dwarf eyes, dropped in large quantities by basic grey dwarfs in the Black Forest, are one of the game's most used mid-tier crafting materials required for portals, among other things. This makes the otherwise relatively humble grey dwarf one of the most economically important enemies in the entire game. Players who establish grey dwarf farms near their base farming the nests for continuous eyes have solved one of the mid-game's more persistent resource bottlenecks entirely passively. Fact 87. Locks, the large armored cattle of the plains biome, can be tamed, bred, and eventually ridden. This was not an original feature of the game, but was added in a later update in response to community requests. Riding a lox across the plains offers not only a degree of protection from the biome's smaller enemies, but also the deeply satisfying experience of exploring the most dangerous open biome in the game atop a creature that most of the enemies in it would rather avoid starting a conflict with. Fact 88. The crafting station system in Valheim requires not just that you build a station, but that you upgrade it. The workbench, forge, and later crafting stations all have upgrade modules, additional structures placed near the main station that improve its quality level and unlock higher tier crafting recipes. This means that a fully maxed out forge surrounded by its anvils, bellows, and tool racks looks quite different from a basic one, and the visual density of an established crafting area communicates at a glance how developed the base is. Fact 89. Valheim allows players to write and place their own signs anywhere in the world. This is used in practical ways, labeling storage chests, marking paths through the forest, flagging dangerous terrain, but the community has also used it for more expressive purposes. Farewell notes left at abandoned bases, warnings left outside fooling territory, lists of the fallen after difficult raids. The sign system is mechanically trivial but socially significant in multiplayer, giving the world a sense of accumulated human presence. Fact 90. The game features a stamina system that applies to combat, running, swimming, and most physical actions. Managing stamina in combat is one of the central mechanical challenges. An enemy that drains your stamina faster than it regenerates will leave you unable to dodge or attack, which is typically fatal. The game has a strong emphasis on not being hit at all, using shields and dodge rolls, rather than simply trading damage with enemies. Players who come from action RPGs with generous health pools frequently need to entirely relearn how they approach combat in Valheim. Fact 91. One-handed weapons allow the player to hold a shield in the other hand. Two-handed weapons prevent shield use but deal more damage, and often have different movesets, staggering enemies on block, dealing area attacks, or providing reach advantages. Spears can be thrown. Bows require arrows to be crafted or found. Crossbows, introduced in the Mistlands update, fire bolts and do not require the sustained draw of a standard bow, making them more forgiving in tense encounters. The weapon variety in Valheim is deliberately broad enough that different players across hundreds of hours rarely settle on exactly the same approach. Fact 92. Fire arrows are one of Valheim's most practical tools for clearing Grey Dwarf nests, the glowing piles of roots that continuously spawn enemies. A nest struck by fire will eventually burn, ending the spawn. This is not something the game tells you. Many players discover it by accident, firing a burning arrow into an area and watching the nest catch. The moment of discovery when the spawn stops and the green light fades has become one of Valheim's most celebrated quality of life revelations for players encountering Black Forest clearing for the first time. Fact 93. The abandoned structures scattered across Valheim's biomes, ruined longhouses in the meadows, collapsed towers in the Black Forest, the overgrown ruins of the plains all belong to the civilization referenced in the runestones as having once been proud and noble before challenging the gods. These structures can be partially rebuilt by the player using the hammer, turning ruins into functional bases. The act of restoring something left behind by a lost civilization to make it habitable again is one of Valheim's quieter narrative gestures. You are not building on an empty world, but on the bones of something that came before. Fact 94. Coins in Valheim can be found in burial chambers, dropped by enemies, found in chests, and discovered in treasure piles. They are used exclusively with Haldor and Hildur. There is no economy between players, no auction house, no vendor that buys items from players. The coin system is deliberately simple. Some players accumulate enormous quantities of coins and never spend them, while others spend their entire supply on a fishing rod the moment they find the merchant. The game does not judge either approach. Fact 95. Fishing in Valheim requires both a fishing rod purchased from Haldor and bait, which can be bought with coins or found in the world. Different bait types attract different fish in different biomes. Fish caught can be cooked for food items. Some fish varieties, introduced in later updates, are specific to the Mistlands ocean regions and provide uniquely powerful food buffs that are not available from any other source. The fishing system is entirely optional and was added significantly after launch in response to community requests, but it has since become one of the game's more beloved activities for players seeking a quieter experience. Fact 96. The game's camera is third person with a relatively close follow distance by default. Pressing a key allows the player to zoom in to a first-person perspective, which changes the game's feel significantly, particularly during exploration and base building. The first-person mode was not initially available at launch but was added in a later update. Building in first person has become a preferred method for many players doing detailed architectural work, as it provides a much more granular sense of scale and placement than the default third-person perspective. Fact 97. Valheim does not have a traditional minimap in the conventional sense. Instead, it has a large map that must be opened manually, on which the player must actively choose to place markers. Unexplored terrain is shown as dark fog that clears as you move through it. The absence of an always visible minimap forces players to internalize landmarks, remember coastlines, and navigate by the sun and stars rather than by a small digital compass in the corner of the screen. This is consistent with how Norse navigation actually worked by reading the sky, the coastline, and the position of the sun. Fact 98. The Valheim lore, laid out across runestones and the occasional cryptic text, never fully explains its central mystery: why Odin needs fallen warriors to do his fighting for him. The gods are presumably powerful enough to deal with their own exiled enemies directly. And yet Odin sends dead Vikings, reborn without memory, into a prison world to kill things that were frightening enough to banish there in the first place. The lore provides the task without explaining the reason. Some players read this as a straightforward game design convention. Others see it as the most interesting question in Valheim's world. What does Odin know that he is not saying? Fact 99. Iron Gate has said consistently across multiple interviews and developer updates that they want Valheim to feel finished, that one is not just a label but a genuine endpoint for the game's early access journey. Richard Svensson and Henrik Turnquist began building this world as a side project, alone, in their spare time. By the time it reaches 1, with all biomes complete, all 8 bosses in place, and the full arc of the player's journey from the meadows to the deep north available, it will have been the work of nearly a decade of their lives. The ending of early access for Valheim will not be the end of the game, but it will be the end of a very particular kind of beginning. Fact 100. And finally, when you first arrive in Valheim, you are given nothing. No weapon, no shelter, no food, no torch. The world generates around you, vast and procedural and indifferent. Hugin drops out of the sky to say hello, tells you to raise a stone and summon the first boss, and then flies away. And then it is just you, and the meadow, and the sound of wind through grass. The game trusts you to figure out the rest. Over 12 million people have taken that first look around, picked up a rock, and begun. And somewhere in the sky above all of them, the branches of Yggdrasil stretch from one horizon to the other, glowing softly, as if the World Tree was never quite willing to let go. Thank you for spending tonight in Valheim with us. Sleep well, and try not to think too hard about what the trolls are painting on those cave walls. Good night.